Hello, friends. I'm Lee C. Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Drew Holcomb. This is Drew's second time on the podcast. Years ago, he was one of the headliners on one of our Thanksgiving shows down at the Ryman Auditorium here in Nashville. Have been a big fan of Drew for quite how many years now. His wife, Ellie, as well, has been on the show with us a time or two. And they're just lovely human beings and wonderful folks here in Nashville. I've been grateful to get to know both of them. Drew's just an outstanding songwriter. He's also, of course, this makes me like him all the more, done graduate work in theology at the University of St. Andrews. And he's one as well that while he cares a great deal about what's going on in the world around him, he doesn't often traffic in platitudes. And so for all of those reasons, of course, I'm going to like Drew. This is a lovely interview. And of course, as we talk about in the interview, we're going on tour together. Drew's going to be with us with Malcolm Gladwell for 7 dates, kind of scattered. I think we're all east of the Mississippi River. So if you're in anywhere kind of from Kentucky northward and eastward, check out nosmallendeavor.com/events. I would love as well for you to drive in an hour or two if you can to join us at those. It's going to be a really special night and a really lovely time. But in the meanwhile, here's our interview with Drew Holcomb. Drew Holcomb is a singer-songwriter and the frontman of Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors. Rolling Stone has called Drew one of Americana's most popular stars. For years now, Drew's songwriting's crafted a sound deeply rooted in storytelling, exploring themes of love, resilience, hope, and often with a subtle but powerful social conscience. This is made for a career that bridges intimate songwriting with a sense of community. And Drew, delighted to have you back a second time on No Small Endeavor. Welcome back.
I'm thrilled to be invited back. I love chatting with you and love the show. Good
to see you. And you're out on tour.
I am. Yeah, we're in show number 9 of 32. So just finished show number 9, and we were between Birmingham and Charlotte. So we came home for a day. We won't get to sleep in our own beds, but at least we spend the day at our house.
Well, when I listened to your new Memory Bank album, I was reminded that I teach a class to undergrads for many years now called Joy and the Good Life. Mm. And in one of the early lectures where I'm playing off with some work that a guy at Harvard has done on miswanting, he's a psychologist, and he talks a lot about how our brains make us miswant. And we need the faster we learn that our brains lead us to miswanting, the sooner we can stop messing ourselves up with regard to what we think is going to make us happy. Mm. And in that context, I talk about this social science study that shows the many ways in which investing in experiences produces more long-term happiness than in buying stuff. And it seems like, then I listened to your album and I thought, this is that, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big sort of motivating theme of the album. I mean, the title track, Memory Bank, put your money in the memory bank, comes from a quote that my dad used to say. I visited 46 states before I graduated high school.
Oh, wow.
Most of those with my family, the second of 4 children. And oftentimes we'd be driving home after a 7 or 8 day trip, visiting places and spending money on the credit card that may not have been in the bank account. And my dad would start sort of nervously laughing and he'd say, I hope you guys don't expect to inherit anything. I put all my money in the memory bank.
What a great line. What a great line. What do you, we'll talk more about the album in just a second, but what do you remember about those days of traveling with family? Your own kind of memory bank experiences.
I remember a lot of times. So I had a brother who had spina bifida and was in a wheelchair. So we had a conversion van with a lift in it. And so the right passenger seat was gone so that the wheelchair could go in there. But when we would take long trips, instead they would sort of break the wheelchair down and tie it to the back of the passenger seat. And we would put a big pallet of blankets on the floor there. And we would take turns riding on the highway, one of us sitting in the captain's chair, 2 of us on the floor, one laying across the back. And a lot of times my grandmother would be joining along on these trips. And I just remember a lot of listening to music. I remember that was where my love of reading began, because we would have these 7-hour drives to get us sort of close to where we were headed. And then my dad loved to drive at night. So I remember he loved to do things during the day and then drive at night, get to a hotel at midnight and pile all 6 of us into a Hampton Inn. And so I just remember a lot of, visiting battlefields and museums and going on adventures. These, let's say we were driving through Texas on the way to New Mexico. Instead of just driving straight through, he would find some horseback riding place that we'd go on for like 3 hours, or a hot air balloon, or just some sort of random local adventure. And I just remember it sort of tying a lot of binding the siblings together quite a bit. And then the other thing I remember is about the time I turned 11 or 12, maybe even a little bit younger, I became the navigator. This was back in the days of the Rand McNally binders,
the paper map.
The paper map. And my mom did this thing that drove my dad crazy. She would always move the map based on turning, and he would say, no, please leave north at the top and just tell me, and I picked up on that really young and started doing it from, he's like, all right, you're in the front, your mom's in the back. So my map skills were very honed for this job that I took, because I started touring before smartphones. And so I had a Rand McNally in the passenger seat as well.
Those are great stories. I have had many similar experiences to that as a boy, because our family did a lot of road trips and for many years in a conversion van. That's really funny. And I ended up loving to do the navigation as well. And I think that young people are cheated these days because they don't get the experience of learning how to use a Rand McNally map.
I strongly agree.
Yeah.
You had to, really remember and sort of connect to the dots of landmarks. Oh, you're going to take the third left by the big tree near the,
There's something about your spatial knowledge that doesn't get developed as much when we're looking down at our phone. And my dad liked to drive at night as well. And I remember that he would a lot of times get too tired, and he would set me in the middle in the front seat. This was when we were in the old Oldsmobile before we got the conversion van, and had the big bench seat in the front,
of course.
And so he would have the cruise control on, going down the interstate. And I would be, 10 or 11 or 12. And he would tap me quietly. And he said, I'm just going to close my eyes. I'm just going to close my eyes for a little bit.
Hold the wheel.
Can you hold the wheel?
Yes, I remember that so well. My dad did the same thing. And then he would also say, we'd pull up to a gas station, you just hand me a 20 and say, go up there and say $20 on pump number 7, Back when you could almost fill a tank on $20.
Oh, your title track song, Memory Bank, there's no guarantee. We've got everything we need. Going to chase the sun, make a little fun while we're willing and able. Any other kind of memories that are at play in that song?
Well, there was actually like sort of a thread of like a potential grief that I think drove my dad to do this growing up. My brother was spina bifida, like I said, and we didn't know how long we had him. So the idea, there's no guarantee. It was a bit of, there was a ticking clock in our family that did end up striking midnight when I was still a kid, when I was 17. So my brother passed away the summer between my junior and senior year. We've talked about that before on the show, but yeah, it wasn't just for fun. It was also because this is the time we have. We don't know when it's going to end, and so it taught me sort of the value of seizing every day as if it's the only one you have. And so I think that colors my writing on this song. And Ellie wrote it with me, and with another friend of ours, Casey Cooley. So we were just talking about how, as your kids, even if you're not chasing like a mortality clock, you're chasing a grown up clock, right? Mm-hmm. It's never the same once your kids leave, So I think he saw this window of opportunity to create a lasting set of memories that we all shared. And then there's also, in this song for me, there's a bit of, we're striking matches to all this madness behind us. I do think that while we cannot escape the chaos of the news feed and the chaos of life, it does seem like sometimes a trip is a reset, is a time to sort of settle the anxiety, to ask yourself questions, to experience new people, to sort of strike imagination. At least that's what it's always done for me. I think it's one of the things that really drew me to this job. besides the music was the see the world mentality, and
Yeah.
I inherited that, not just from my dad, but from my mom's father I grew up down the street from, and then friends and then literature. I mean, I was a huge reader of, I mean, I never forget reading, The Count of Monte Cristo when I was, I don't know, 13, 14 years old, and going, okay, this is like, it's not just that it takes me around the world, it takes me back in time.
Yeah.
Or it takes me forward in time, or it takes me to another world that doesn't even exist. Lord of the Rings, and so the imaginative spirit of travel and adventure and risk was sewn into my soul at a young age.
Yeah, that reminds me of the line from Augustine where he says something like, it gets quoted all the time, and who knows if he really said this, but it's something like, the world is a book, and those who travel read only one page or only read one chapter or something like that. And I've always thought that's super helpful, that there's a sort of expansiveness to our imagination that occurs as we see other people, other places, and travel in that way. So it's certainly been the case for us. And it's certainly stoked my own imagination about possibilities. And as you were saying, it puts a lot of things in perspective that I don't think I would be able to put in perspective as well if I don't have these other experiences.
Yeah, because you meet people that are different than you, and inevitably. So it stirs empathy, it stirs curiosity.
Yeah. I wonder, in what ways do you think that this notion of adventure and living into the day that you've got, and kind of seizing the day, you've got the carpe diem illusion in this song, right? In what way does that kind of spirit of that you got from your childhood, you think, play out in your own music career and or your songwriting?
Yeah, I think there's a bravery required to and a vulnerability required to write songs that share intimate thoughts and feelings or premonitions. I mean, sometimes music can be a sermon, sometimes it can be a lament, sometimes it can be a monologue, it can be a locker room speech, it can be a long story. So songwriting sort of contains all these different ways of communicating, and they all require a bit of risk to put yourself out there, to whether it's, let's take a love song, something as simple as a love song. If there's actually a sort of a target of the love song, let's say the song I wrote about Ellie that sort of was the one that helped me express my feelings to her back when she would not date me 20 years ago. It's a fun, sort of silly song. I like to be with me when I'm with you. But I'll never forget, I wrote this song after sort of telling her that I was interested in more than friendship with her. Or no, I was planning on telling her that, and I wrote this song to help give me the courage to do it. So I played this song in front of her. I knew she was going to be the audience. And then that night I told her, hey, this song that I wrote, she's like, I love your new song. And I was like, yeah, it's about you. And I was like putting myself right in the crosshairs of a potential heartbreak. And thankfully that one didn't go that way.
How did she respond in that moment?
She basically said maybe. She was working through her own heartache at the time. So, for me, the music was how I processed different trials in my life, whether it was, writing songs about my brother to sort of deal with the grief there, or to, the song Dragons I wrote about my grandfather and the impact he's had on my life. A song like Free, Not Afraid to Die was written for me in the wake of getting meningitis and spending a week in the hospital and thinking that I was, never going to be the same. Dance with Everybody is a song that I wrote in the wake of not being able to play shows in COVID and really missing the audience. And it took me like 7 months to write a song in that time, because I realized that having the audience was what was driving, like the communication between me and the audience was what was driving me to write. And I didn't have that. So when I got it back, wrote Dance with Everybody as an ode to the audience. And so a lot of my songwriting is me processing whatever I'm going through. And so there's the sense of adventure in that is that you're taking the risk of putting that on paper and to music, and even singing it in and of itself is a significant act of vulnerability. You know that. You love to sing. Yeah. And yeah, there's an independence to it as well that I didn't find in like team sports as a child, that I found in music, where it's just on you, to sort of see if you can capture someone's imagination in a short amount of time.
Yeah. So 2 follow-up questions there. One, you pointed to one of the ways there's a vulnerability entailed in what you do. But how would you think about kind of in a more abstract way, how you would describe the vulnerability entailed in just creative work generally? And then the second follow-up would be, how would you translate to those who do not see themselves as doing creative kind of endeavors? Mm-hmm. But all of us have to face our own, going back to your song Dragons, all of us got to face our own dragons, right? And what are things that you've learned through doing your sort of work that has required you to do work courageously? What have you learned that you could think more abstractly would be good wisdom to live by generally in that regard?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer the second part first because it's fresh, but I think the thing that I love about the creative act that I think is transferable to anybody's life, even if they don't find themselves sort of vocationally in a creative spot, or they don't find themselves sort of even as a hobby, find themselves doing quote unquote, the arts, creative, there's creativity in everything. But I think in a lot of ways, the act itself is, when you're making something, you're going to make mistakes. And so it teaches you to overcome the fear of perfection, like the pursuit of perfection, because any great record you've ever heard, they sang it multiple times. I mean, maybe somebody who's really good didn't, but that's incredibly rare. But even if they did, they got there by practicing and doing other recordings and failing. And so creativity is a way to sort of overcome fear. It's a way to make something that didn't exist before, is a way to express your point of view, which some people may take issue with that point of view. But at the end of the day, that's not your responsibility as the creator, just to deal with other people's feelings and reactions to it. I mean, it's almost impossible not to do that to some degree, especially in the social media age. But I think there's somebody says, I really want to do this, I want to do that, but what if it goes wrong? And it's like, yeah, it probably will. It's not going to turn out like you think it's going to. Yeah. It's probably going to be harder than you thought it was, but you certainly won't know unless you give it a shot. I'm just sort of inherently built for trial and error. Like I like, if it comes down to one or two, if I have to decide between two things, it's like, well, you just pick one. What if you're wrong? Well, then start over or do it differently next time. And then you get better and better at it. Yeah. And so the more you create, the more failures you have, the better your work is in the end. And I think that's good to answer the first part of the question. I think abstractly, I think creativity is an imaginative act of looking at all sort of what the world was, and maybe reimagining what the world was, or what the world is, and reimagining what it is, or just trying to find a different way to look at it and see it or hear it, and the same thing of imagining what the world could be, and that could be both apocalyptic or utopian. It sort of goes both ways. Yeah,
I think that the danger of perfectionism is certainly something that I had to overcome in my earlier years, and I think that it really hobbled me in a lot of ways when I was younger, and because I had to do everything just right, and it was really the gift of learning to expect making mistakes and to know that making mistakes actually would get me faster. I would get more quickly to where I wanted to go.
By making
more
mistakes.
Quickly I would be okay at making mistakes.
Yeah, I know you probably like Anne Lamott. She's one of my favorite writers. In Bird by Bird, she has a chapter where it starts off that perfection is the voice of the enemy. Basically like the destroyer of all possibility.
Huh.
I have this rule in the studio called the 98% rule. So I think, this is my opinion, I think a lot of musicians spend so much time trying to get their records to perfection, which, let's call that 100%. It takes 50% of the time you spend working on a record to get it to 95. And then people will spend another 50% trying to get it to 100. I think the best you ever get to is 98.
Huh.
And so I always tell people, once it's really, really good and feeling really human, but well executed, stop working on it and move on to the next song. Now, if you're still just having fun and trying new things and filling up space, and you can always, as long as you at least get a benchmark of where the 98 is, and you can save that, then you could, yeah, sure, if you want to keep working on it, great. But you're not getting to 100, so don't try.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of a friend of mine who's a portrait painter, and I once heard him say something like, there is no perfection. There's only a good stopping place. And I thought I find that super helpful. Yeah. So we've talked about you going and doing a master's degree before, but I've read, today I was reading it cataloged as a master's in divinity. I thought you did a master's in history, but which one of those is it?
No, it was a MTH, master's in theology from St. Andrews University.
Okay. Yeah.
University of St. Andrews, yeah.
You've already alluded to the death of your brother, and as you said, we've talked about that before, but I read today that you said in talking about that season, Van Morrison was helping me make more sense of it than the Psalms were. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I grew up in a really beautiful community, Southern evangelical, conservative, but there was definitely a lot of pressure to make sense of the world through the lens of a certain set of assumptions about the world and about those who were in the family, lowercase family, those who were sort of a part of the thing and those who weren't. I remember every conversation about anyone was like, well, do they know the Lord? Are they walking with the Lord? And there was just this sort of, it felt like sometimes it was a fence between humans, what if you know their story? What if you get to know them? And I think you probably understand this too. And then other denominations would be talked about in certain ways. Well, the Methodists, they're just a bunch of do-gooders. They don't really believe in the Bible. Or, the Roman Catholics, they don't, and it wasn't any sort of malicious intent. It was just, it was the sort of the culture of evangelicalism in the 80s and 90s. And so the way that sort of played out for me was I was a question asker. Okay, so can you guys tell me exactly how this book of books came together and who decided what was in it and what was not? And not very many people could give me an answer. They would say, you need to go talk to so-and-so. And I got to talk to so-and-so. And they'd say, anyways, that's an example of one of many questions I had about, I lived in a community that was very much a short earth creation, and my biology class in high school, I felt like it was more about creation apologetics than it was about learning biology. And so, but at the same time, it was filled with people who were very full of love, and they loved me and they cared for me and my family, and my parents were amazing, and they were more open-minded than sort of a lot of the people that I found myself with, yet they were still sort of in that community. And so it all kind of came to a head when my brother died, because I just got really, really angry with all of the platitudes that were being thrown my way by the church community. He's in a better place, and all of these sort of things that weren't really holding space for two things. One, the sadness and grief that I had of his absence, that was his permanent absence. And then the second piece was there was not a lot of space held for some of they kind of mythologized him in a way that didn't feel very three-dimensional. where my brother had some things about him that looking back on it were pretty sad. Like because he was in a wheelchair, he was confined to certain activities. And so he always called people just to say hi. And it was like this, oh, he was so great. He just loved to call and talk on the phone. But as he got older, I realized it was starting to become like sort of annoying to people. And I found myself in that too. And there was a grief of that as well, that I didn't necessarily always give him the time. But there were parts of his life that were really hard and painful. And they were in the wake of his death. Everything was sort of put into this like nice bow of God's will was all of these things. And isn't that beautiful and amazing? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm still sad and I miss my brother. So I felt really lonely in that space. And music, I started listening to a lot of music because I felt like that was a place where even if the music wasn't necessarily about what I was going through, it just like I just was connecting with the emotions of it and the story of it and the way people sang and the joy and the grief in their voices. The ache is the word I like to use. Like people say, what kind of music do you like? And I say, I like music that aches. And I can hear that in, a country song. I can hear it in a pop song, hip hop song, folk song. And that's like, ache is like my short word for believability, whether the singers really means what they say. So I just found a lot of solace in music, and I found that it was okay for me to not have answers about my own tragedy or then things that I didn't have to have answers theologically. Although I did spend the next 4 years sort of pursuing those answers and got to a place where I was really comfortable. Oh, I never forget. I went to go study in St. Andrews, and this friend of mine's father, who was a very sort of, he had a PhD in theology from a very conservative institution, and who a lot of wonderful people have gone there, but he got super upset with me. He's like, no, there's a bunch of really scary theologians over there in Scotland. They're neo-evangelicals, and they read this guy named Karl Barth, and he's very dangerous, and you need to not, and, I mean, probably to his credit, he was right. I went over there and fell in love with Karl Barth. So, but this idea of like, watch out. There's the boogeyman's out to, to get you. And I was more like, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of really beautiful things to be learned from people who are not in this exact sort of box. And then, the same folks that like worship C.S. Lewis, but then, don't talk about some of his more controversial points of view, And so I just sort of found myself gravitating towards musicians and theologians and novelists who held I just felt like they held more space and a bigger tent for people like me that had a lot of questions.
Huh. And I also read, I don't think we've discussed this ever in the past either. Did you write a thesis, Springsteen and the American Redemptive Imagination?
Yeah, that was my master's thesis in St. Andrews. Yeah.
Yeah, talk about that. That I would assume that the ache has to be a central part of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it was a really selfish but lovely experience. I was going to this program in St. Andrews basically just because I wanted to keep going to school. My music career was doing okay, but it was not a sure thing. At this point, I was 26, 27 years old, and I had originally chosen music as a 3 to 4 year maybe, and it maybe was turning into maybe longer. But I always wanted to write, and I wanted to study, and I thought maybe I would end up in sort of college level teaching. And so I said, well, I found this program at St. Andrews that would let me go for 10 days twice a year through the St. Mary's College of Divinity there. And it was a beautiful experience. And the last semester you write a thesis. And so I went to, was doing sort of various things and asked around if I could do a study on Springsteen's career, his lyrics, his music, his life story, and dig into really why popular music, which is this, really 20th century phenomenon based on, audio technology that allowed for mass level concerts and radio and vinyl and all of these things that created sort of Western pop culture. So I got to write about and did a bunch of, and there's also like academics love Springsteen. So there's a plethora of, there's actually like a Springsteen academic conference. So I just jumped fully into the nerdness of that, and I wrote basically a thesis about his life's work, and sort of drew from kind of made 3 points that his influence sort of derives from 3 things that are all connected to the church. The first is his sort of blue collar American Protestant work ethic, bootstraps story, of go to work hard, got to make it that way. And the second is the sort of live experience that he gets from the black church via the soul music that he grew up on, which has the call and response, and the audience is a sort of a major participant in the experience of a Springsteen show, which is a big part of the culture there. You meet people at a Springsteen show that have seen him 70, 80, 90 times.
Wow.
I mean, it's wild. And then the third would be the sort of intersection of Irish and Italian Catholicism that he grew up in. So his mother was of Italian heritage, his father was of Irish heritage, and he grew up in the sort of shadows of 2 very different strands of Catholicism. And so you take all those 3, really 4 things, and sort of churn them up, and all of a sudden you've got this phenomenon known as Bruce Springsteen. So then I got to dive into some of the I love Steinbeck too. So the whole chapter on Steinbeck and the Ghost of Tom Joad and his love of those narratives. And so it was a really fun experience. I've never gotten it to where, it's a bit of an academic paper. It's not quite a layman's paper. So someday maybe I'll translate myself and see if it's something worth putting out. But more than anything, it just helped me hone my own craft and my own sort of, I wanted to think critically about what I do and how I do it, and make sure that I'm not, just sort of putting one foot in front of the other, but thinking about where I'm going.
Have you gotten to meet him yet?
I have not, no. I haven't pursued it actively, just because that's one of those things I feel like if it's supposed to happen, it'll happen.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question about the business and the creative. So, I mean, you're a businessman. You've got a number of business ventures that you've cultivated and have grown, and you're an artist. And there's this common trope of the tension between profitability, business interests, and doing something beautiful and creative. And so, I would be interested to hear: have you had episodes where there was that tension? And what'd you do with it? And then have there been other occasions where you have found that those have gone hand in hand and have actually helped one another?
Yes, and yes. I would say the tension for me, well, there's always a tension in when art becomes commerce. You're considering your audience one way or the other, right? You're either considering the audience that you have or the audience that you're trying to find. And it can be very, very tempting to sort of try to find an audience that might be the wrong audience, but it might be an easier audience if you sort of put commerce in front of art, say, well, you shouldn't record it that way because that won't go on the radio. Well, that's going to, I think, hurt the artistic expression. No, that's not just, I don't think it's necessarily an either or. I think it's sort of a spectrum, Everybody who's a professional songwriter artist has to at least consider the commercial piece of it. I've definitely had times where I've been in co-writes and someone says, oh, we can't say that. You got to say it this way. And I've said, well, I'm not saying it that way, because they said, well, nobody's going to pick it up for radio or TV or film. I said, well, that's fine. I can't in good conscience, say something I don't believe in or that I don't mean. And what I found for me, and this is unique, maybe, I don't know if it's unique or not. It's my story. So I found that I started getting TV placements when I was pretty young, like where shows would use a song of mine to soundtrack a certain melodramatic moment, as they often do. And I had a couple of those that happened from my very first album, an album that's not even available anymore, called Washington Blue. And all of a sudden I got a $3,000 check, and I was 23 years old, and going, wow, this is awesome. That's like weeks of touring. I gotta lean into this. So I started sort of copycatting myself, and then listening on TV and trying to make stuff that sounded like what they wanted, and it dried up. And then I had this thing happen to me personally, where my sister had 3 kids at the time, and we saw them all the time, and she called me and she said, we're moving to Central America. And I got really sad because we saw them all the time, and they were sort of felt called to go down there and do this really cool sort of education and mission thing. They were down there, ended up being down there for 8 years. But so I got really sad that night, and without thinking about anything about commercials or TV, I just wrote this simple 3-chord song for my nieces and nephew called Live Forever. And all of a sudden I put the song out, and it got picked up by multiple TV stations, a couple commercials, and all of a sudden it kind of gave me, really was the major kickstart to our career. And I sort of learned in that moment that for me, as long as I make a smart commercial plan after I've made the creative work to promote it, if I just focus on making the most honest work I can while I'm in the studio and while I'm writing, then that's sort of step one. And then I sort of jump into, okay, so now we've done that. Now how do we make it? How do we let people know about it? How do we get it in front of people? Who do we hire to publicize it? Or, there's obviously like building out of a team. And that's where I've enjoyed the business pieces more, in the sort of leading a team, having a vision with a team about what we want a tour to look like, what we want the interviews to look like that are surrounding a certain album. But when it comes to the writing and the recording, I really try not to think too much about the commerce of it, only because my career has served me so that it's telling what like the market has told me is, hey, be honest and make your best work, and it will be sort of marketable and viable in the public sphere. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm also not in, mainstream music, so I have that freedom. But sometimes it does get interesting. You can be criticized, like, oh, your song sounds like, oh, you wrote that just for a car commercial. I'm like, I promise I didn't. Find Your People has had all this success on commercials. I literally sat down one day and wrote that song about my neighbors.
Huh.
Just talking about how much I love my neighbors.
Huh.
And my friends. So
yeah, that's fascinating. It reminds me of that, Steve. I've not read much Stephen King. I've read one of his time travel books about the Kennedy assassination, and I read his book on writing. And his book on writing is great. And I remember he says in there that the number one rule for writing is that you must be honest. Mm-hmm. And I've always found that just to be super helpful advice. And it sounds like it resonates with what you're saying. You just have to be honest with yourself and honest who you are. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and as soon as I'm intentionally being derivative of something else, I start to smell like ambition and ego in a way that I know is not true to who I am, and my band also will call it out. So that's not you. What's going on?
That's really interesting. I mean, as you have had a lot of success in recent years, how have you had to navigate your own internal ambition and ego and vanity?
Yeah. Well, every day I'm always navigating my ambition and my ego. I think some ambition is healthy and beautiful, and I want to make great work. I think, like a lot of people who grew up in my era, we grew up in the shadows of our great man era grandfathers, and so you had this mentality of like the mythology of what you do and your hobbies and your work, and is your legacy. And some of that I still am okay with. Some of that I see a lot of pride and problematic, sort of self-centeredness in. So that said, I think the way I handle it is I surround myself with people who know me well, and that wouldn't put up with that if they saw it. Whether that's my wife primarily, who is also in the same field. And so we have an ability to sort of catch each other before any sort of major mistake has been made as far as being not true to yourself, either on social media or in writing and recording. But so my wife and then my close friends, and I'm very close to my father and my brother. Actually, my brother's lived a really beautiful 8-year sobriety journey. So we've been in the trenches with each other a lot. And so there's a just long history of deep honesty. And he's got my family he has my family's back and I have his family's back. And so that's been really a beautiful fruit of a lot of hard years. So, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's been a victory for me in the last 5 years. I think the biggest struggle for me for a long time was comparing myself to other artists and feeling like I wasn't getting what I deserved. Or, I mean, it can be a dog eat dog out there with festivals and radio and tours, and you feel like sometimes you're getting left behind, or your work's not being properly, respected. And I think I've moved on from a lot of that as I've gotten older, and moved much more towards gratitude that I have an audience, that I can write the songs I want to write, I can collaborate with the people I want to collaborate with, and that work has created enough sort of economic stability that I can do it and pay people what they should be paid and not ask for favors.
That reminds me of, I think the last time we did an interview, we were talking about some of this stuff, and you said something like that you had decided that as long as there was enough money to pay the bills and enough left over to keep on dreaming, you had decided you were going to keep doing it. Mm-hmm. And I just found that just super helpful, because I repeated that to myself numerous times after that interview, and kind of wished that I had heard somebody say that to me 10 years prior. It's just because it points to a sort of trust, and it points to a sort of gratitude for what you do have, and then you just keep on going. And it seems like that served you pretty well.
Yeah, it has served me well. I think the trick has also been to make sure I don't create a bills and cash flow situation where that number gets,
too tight. So it's also, there's a wisdom in restraint, even when you do have sort of successful years or series of years. Yeah.
I'm not necessarily saying I'm good at that, but I'm aware that that's a potential pitfall.
Yeah. Maybe You Will. Is that song on the new album?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that song. And it strikes me that it's almost like a weaving Irenaeus, second century church father who used to say the glory of God's a human being fully alive. It's like you're weaving Irenaeus and the Sermon on the Mount together in that song. And
that's really a pretty high praise there, Lee.
Jesus and Irenaeus.
As long as you don't compare me to Tertullian, we'll be good.
There's lots to like about Tertullian.
There is a lot to like about Tertullian. There's also a lot of...
But he probably wouldn't be a very fun friend.
No, he would not be a fun friend.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, there's... we were talking about so much of our... This part of it's a era of life being our early 40s. We were talking about how we're seeing a lot of our friends just sort of fall in one of two camps. One, they're sort of grateful and happy with their lives and self-aware that anything good that's happened is worth celebrating, and if their life's going really well, they're aware that they don't not necessarily the sole reason that is that way is that they had some help along the way, or they had some lucky breaks. And so that's one camp. The other camp are people that feel like their life's getting away from them and their dreams are too far gone. And it could be something as simple in the song as, talk about singleness. We talk about people that can't find rest. We talk about people that you may not find the strength to climb that hill. You may not get the job on the top floor. There's a bit of this song, from my perspective, is a bit of an attempt to stab fear a bit, sort of get one back at fear. Yeah, you may not get, this may not happen, this may not happen, this may not happen, but maybe it will, and there's also I love this chorus for a lot of reasons, but we're talking about birds fly through the air like they ain't got a care. The trees keep reaching towards the sun. It's a miracle we're living in a world that's always spinning. It'll still be spinning when we're gone. This idea that the more comfortable you are with your own mortality, the more you can enjoy the ride. I think Ellie and I have buried a lot of friends in the last decade, and family. And some of it was old age and a great life and a great death. And some of it was just absolutely tragic: pediatric cancer, airplane crash, midlife cancer, car crash, just brutal stuff. That these songs are written sort of in the soil of that. And no one tells a river where to run. This idea that you're not really in control, you're just on the ride. And, but I think that we're trying to sort of paint a bit of hope into those corners, maybe you will. And we've been singing it as the encore on the tour, which is cool because the last verse is, you may never get the answers that you long for. They may never raise the curtain for the encore. You may not see the harvest from the ground you till, but then again, maybe you will. Mm-hmm. And I think there's Ellie has this quote. I think it's Erasmus. No, it's not Erasmus. It's Emerson. There's too many E's, Emerson has a quote about, plan for the centuries, plant sequoias. If you think of your life only in terms of,
that's a fantastic line.
Yeah. If you think of your life only in terms of, well, all I've got is what I've got, and you're not thinking about what you do that could carry on, it's a real missed opportunity, So.
Yeah. It seems to me repeatedly, as we've interviewed a lot of interesting folks over the last number of years, that notion of getting, at least, if not comfortable, at least more familiar with the reality of our own mortality, mm-hmm. and just trying to lean into acceptance of that. And the way, I didn't know this until recently, until I was working on an interview with a friend of mine who died of cancer, and I interviewed him as at several places along the way as he was fighting cancer that finally took his life. But in the work on that series of interviews, a friend of mine who's a lit professor said, there were these death manuals they used to have in the Middle Ages where they would write about how to die well. And I'd never heard of that before, because I can't think of any kind of analog that we have in our day and age.
Yeah.
But this notion of having the courage to look at our own mortality and to accept it rather than try to run from it, it does seem crucial to try to live a good life. Yeah,
there's this there's a songwriter and author named Alan Levi who has a book, really beautiful book out right now called Theo of Golden. But his first book was about his brother having cancer, and they lived on the same farm in separate houses as adults. And he has this book called The Last Sweet Mile. And it's just basically about their last year together. And he basically stopped all of his own work except for just to take care of his brother. And I stole that line from a song called Gratitude, where it talks about, all that gets taken, all that remains. We have, to me, there's a bit of the scarcity of life is what gives it value. Mm. If we all lived forever on this earth, there would be no sort of rush to love and rush to justice and rush to mercy and rush to know people, because you just have all the time in the world for it. And so we had to go to a funeral in early December for a friend who had a 10-year fight with cancer. And walking in, I was talking with my best friend, Matt, who is just a dear soul. And I said, "Is it weird that I'm excited about this?" He said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I know that we're about to cry our eyes out in here. And we're going to watch this video of him with his kids. And we're going to hear stories about him. And we're going to laugh. And we are going to absolutely sob. But I'm so excited to honor his life and to do that with all these people in a room that love each other." And I'm like, man, I sound like an 80-year-old, But I do think that there's so much beauty in celebrating the limited time and space that we have, and then we get to share. One of my other good friends, Steven, always says to me when we hang out, he goes, "Hey man, I'm glad we're sharing this time." What does he say? He says something about, "I'm glad that we share air together in our lives. You know, we're getting to do it at the same time."
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Let's talk about love songs a second.
Okay.
I think a year or two ago, I think I sent you a text saying that at the end of the year, my Spotify thing came up, and What Would I Do Without You was like one of my top, I can't remember what it was, 2 or 3 on my Spotify listen list. And I love your love songs, and I think that one of the reasons I love them is that they're not so much about falling in love as much as they are about staying in love and what it means to stay in love. And so you and Ellie both have this sort of way of crafting these songs where it's it's work to be in love, and it's work to stay in love, and it's and this funny song that you have, "You Drive Me Crazy," this double entendre song. That's a wicked little song. That's a great song.
That's a great way to describe it. It's a wicked little song.
But it's got the man thinking about everything that goes with "You Drive Me Crazy." You're driving me crazy. In a sexualized way.
When you wear that, it drives me nuts.
Yeah, that's right. And then you've got the wife saying, "You drive me crazy," kind of stuff. So, but talk a little bit about how you see the function of your love songs, or the artistry, or the philosophy of your love songs.
Yeah, when I started out as an artist, I had like a no love songs rule for myself. And that may be why my career floundered for the first 4 or 5 years. But and my first love song I wrote was this one I wrote about Ellie, like that I mentioned earlier. And then it's just, I think that's really interesting to think about my songs, the songs about staying in love, not falling in love. I haven't really thought about that. But marriage is really hard. You know, it's very challenging. It's very exposing, and it makes you, I've had my worst moments have been in argument or conflict with my wife, but I also think my best moments have been, in resolving those conflicts. And so the more I meet people who've been married for a long time, they just have like a ton of tenderness towards each other. Not always, obviously, but there's a massive amount of respect and tenderness, because you've either walked through a lot of really hard things together, or you've been the primary person walking through something while they go through something really hard. And so, like High Seas is the song on the new record. It was actually the first one we wrote, and it's really a song about, the metaphor of the high seas as sort of the storms we have to brave in order to, and we started with follow me, I'll follow you, will you follow me? And I think that I'll follow you, especially from a man's perspective, is really important. Like, hey, I'll follow you. Will you follow me too? This sort of mutual dying to self, and but I think that I come across people all the time who, like the Wine We Drink is another love song that I wrote early that sort of deals with this idea that the mundane is really where the magic is. Washing dishes in the kitchen, and my love songs I don't think are sort of aspirational. They're sort of they're in the trenches, And even the one you mentioned, What Would I Do Without You? The first line of the song is, "Sometimes I wake up with the sadness, other days it feels like madness." That doesn't sound like the start of a love song, right? It sounds like the start of I'm not doing good.
Yeah.
Which is true. I was not doing good when I wrote that song. I was going through a massive, "Where are you, God? You are silent." And it was a 5-year sort of valley for me. Of deconstruction, reconstruction, it was a tough couple of years. And at first I was afraid to share much of it with Ellie, because she's like a really, I don't think she would mind me saying it this way. Like faith is really natural to her. Like it's this idea of sort of interacting with a triune God. It's like, she's like, yeah, that's, of course. I'm like, this is crazy. And then I got comfortable just respecting and learning from hers and not letting it sort of make me feel less than or shame in it. And her carrying my questions and my sorrows. And that song was born out of that, not out of like, ooh, you're so cute. Will you be my girlfriend? You know, it was born out of like 10 years of really loving each other, doing hard work. And especially, and it was in a season where some of our peers were, theirs were sort of falling apart. So yeah, that's where that song came from. But I do think that that's right, that there's my love songs, hopefully. Now there's some exceptions, like You Drive Me Crazy is like, it's funny.
Yeah.
You know, there's like, if you can't have a little bit of, we did have a concerned fan, you'll love this, who's really more of an Ellie fan. And if, for those of you who don't know, my wife is Ellie Holcomb. She's a more of a Christian artist who writes these beautiful songs. They're very amazing and sort of autobiographical, just psalms in a way. But she has a lot more sort of traditionally evangelical fans than I do. And they were asking about this tour, and they said, "Is this tour safe for my 8-year-old?" How many of Drew's innuendo songs are there going to be? And I'm like, we're happily married. These are songs about happily married sexual tension, you know. But
you could have asked him if they ever read the Song of Solomon.
Yeah, I was like, have you read? Yeah, there's some stuff in there that your 8-year-olds probably shouldn't be reading. But yeah, we're having a lot of fun. But one of the things that was interesting about this particular project was, as a duets record, it's pretty easy to just only go to love song.
Yeah.
You know, because like, oh, man and woman singing together. It's got to be about love. So it was really, we made it a very significant point to not have that be the default. Now we obviously have some on there. High Seas, absolutely. We Can Go Dancing. You Drive Me Crazy. Money in the Memory Bank is a little bit of both. It's both and, you know, sort of a family, could be friends, but but writing outside of that as well was more challenging. We thought it would be more challenging, but it wasn't, because we've had so much shared experience in our life together. We were able to write about Where Are You Going to Go is about sort of they're really two parents singing about a prodigal, you know. And then Silver Thread is about our niece that passed away from cancer, and Never Gonna Let You Go is about friendship. It's about just the idea of like, when you get people, when you find gold, you hold on. So I don't necessarily think of my songs in the categories of love songs and not love songs, because it all feels like it's all a bit of the same stew that I'm sort of, making. And, but I have really enjoyed, Ellie and I didn't write together very well for 20 years. And in this record, we just decided to grow up and do it. So we had a blast.
Are you open to talking any about that period of deconstruction, reconstruction?
Sure.
What would you say are some of the main parameters or precipitating events that led you into that season?
Yeah. I think for a lot of my life as a Christian, I felt like my questions went mostly unanswered, and in two ways. One, I felt like they were unanswered to me by the knowledgeable pastoral figures in my life. There was a bit of, I'll never forget, I sat down in college with a pastor friend and asked him to help lead me towards some books about the canon, and he was like, "Man, I hadn't even thought about that since seminary. I have no idea where to send you, It just really disappointed me, because I'm like, man, but you're up there every week telling me this is the word of God. How do I know that? I feel like that was a fair question, but I felt like my questions were sort of seen as invasive and lacking faith. so that's one sort of moment. And then I wasn't given a lot of space for lament and grief in the wake of my brother's death. And then I had a friend die from drug overdose a couple of years after that. And that was really sad and hard. And he had lived a really painful life already. He was a single mother, raised by his grandmother. There's just a series of sort of tragic people in my life that I was angry with God that their lives had played out that way. And then also traveling the world and seeing a lot of the pain and suffering and sort of this blasé sort of American attitude towards the suffering, American Christian attitude towards the suffering of people in the world, not necessarily by everyone, but by sort of the mass of cultural Christians. And it felt like the love that was sort of given out towards people was a little bit of like there was still a lot of othering in the way that it was framed. Oh, we're helping those people. It just made me mad, and so my politics made a change, and then I felt even more ostracized outside of that. I found myself, even though I didn't agree with a lot of what he said, I really enjoyed the sort of cultural commentary of Christopher Hitchens. Well, that scared the mess out of a lot of people, but I loved his honesty and vulnerability, and I would really love to. I wish he was around for this current political moment we're in. I'm so curious to hear what he would have to say about it all.
Yeah, he would have plenty to comment on, wouldn't he?
Oh, he would. He was a brilliant essayist and polemicist, but but it all sort of, all of that was person to person, but I realized that it had made it impossible for me to see and hear God in my life. And so Ellie and I went on this anniversary trip, 5-year anniversary trip. It was a hike through the Alps. And I basically decided I was going to go out every night and beg God to speak to me. And I did it for 9 straight nights. And I basically felt like I got nothing back. And I cried myself to sleep 3 or 4 nights. And so I just basically walked away for a couple of years from any sort of devotional attention. I mean, I still went to church, but I was basically just playing the part. And then slowly started to sort of be open to, this is around the same time my brother started his sobriety journey coming out of that. I had some other people in my life that had some really beautiful things happen to them that were somewhat miraculous. And I just kind of had to make peace with the fact. So the way I would sort of describe my faith is that I am very confident there's a God and it's not me. And the story of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is kind of the best one I've heard. And so I'm willing to ascribe to that emotionally and philosophically, theologically. But there's not much else inside of the frame of sort of evangelical Christianity specifically that there's not a whole lot of hills I would die on. But I really relate to, you talk about the Sermon on the Mount, you talk about John 17 and the care that Jesus had for his followers and his disciples in the world. I mean, I resonate deeply with it, but I feel very estranged and like the lost sheep from the current mass market version of Western Christianity.
Is that sense of alienation or distance, are you at a place of where you've kind of accepted that, or does it bring up anger for you, or do you vacillate between the two?
I don't really find myself angry at individuals within it. I do feel angry at sort of the systems and powers that be in the way that they abuse power, privilege to sort of maintain status quo while completely denying obvious directives from, the scriptures about how to treat your neighbors and the poor. And So I feel angry at some of the systems in place, but I feel like I can pick somebody out who says something that really irritates me or makes me angry, and I can see them I try to imagine everybody as a 7-year-old and go, what happened between then and now that created this adult? And I can have mercy for that story, whatever it is, even if I don't know what the story is. And I hope that they would, be able to do the same for me. So I still have a sense of anger and at the injustice of things that make me, at certain things, but I don't necessarily. I'm able to take some breaths and have some perspective, and I think there's also like big, broad historical things at play that, I've learned to sort of make peace with. It. I'm not going to be able to be the, somebody who's can stand in the gap at every injustice in the world.
Yeah,
you kind of have to choose your battles.
Right.
But I'm not angry at God about it as much as I used to be. So
Why do you
that's
think?
actually, well, I think I deeply believe that he made us well, and he gave us imagination and creativity and love. And those are really beautiful and generative things that do a lot of good for the world. And that when you get to know people on an individual level and you get to know their story, there's something, there's a really beautiful sort of mirror at something good and eternal. And, I think I'm able to just sort of stay there, when it comes, sort of at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think I honestly sort of stop being angry at myself too. You get, there's all sorts of shame and guilt in our lives, the way that we've treated people or the way that we've not treated people. And I think we all know that we all contain, in the words of Bob Dylan, we all contain multitudes, and I think once you realize that about yourself and you have mercy for yourself, it's easier to do the same for others.
Yeah. Yeah. It is remarkable, the ripple effect of coming to a place of where you can be kind to yourself and patient with yourself in the way that impacts all of my relations around me. And I want to remember that about thinking about the 7-year-old. How did this person go from the 7-year-old to the person they are now is quite helpful.
Yeah.
So as we move toward close, any particular things that you are working on right now, wisdom you're trying to cultivate in yourself, new habits, practices that help you move in the direction you want to go?
Yeah, I'm really working on one inside of my marriage that's been really good. I think Ellie and I've learned a lot about our personalities, and I'm, while on paper sort of a great team player, I've also learned that I have the sort of capacity I'm a ambitious sort of challenger, a person who likes to get things done, that I can sort of eventually kind of mold. I'm good at sort of molding the world in the way that I want it to operate, and my lack of patience to understand what she wants and dreams has, I think, been a hindrance for some points of connection between us. And I'm really starting to listen to that and figure out how to make space for that. And then I think I'm really working on doing the best work that I can without letting it dominate as much headspace as it has for me, an identity space. So I'm trying to go from 80 shows a year, for instance, down to 55 or 60, and to learn to say no to opportunities just because they're financially beneficial, if they're not beneficial to bigger visions I have about what it looks like to be a father of my 3 children and a neighbor and a friend. And and I'm also starting to I'm starting to think about writing my first book, and that's been fun to sort of, I'm collecting every interesting story I can think of from my life on the road and then all of my travels, but when I was young, and funny stories and poignant stories. And I think I've found the right frame for them. And now I've just got to, once this tour is done, I'm going to start sitting down to write some of them and sort of see where it goes.
That's great. Well, we'll look forward to that. And we're going to be touring together, Drew.
Yes, we are.
I'm pretty excited about that. I'm both excited and nervous. Yeah, of course, you've been doing this for years, and this is my first time to do this. And so, but we're very excited. You and Malcolm Gladwell and several of your bandmates and several other artists from Nashville. It's going to be a wonderful time. We're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am too. I really appreciate the invitation. I while you said, I have toured a lot, I have not done a show like the one that we're imagining and dreaming. So I'm equally nervous and excited, which is, I think, I always say, if you're not nervous to get up on stage and deliver something to people, then it's probably not a good thing. So
Yeah.
I think the nerves are part of the special sauce.
Yes. And you've got a little grudge going in. I talked to Malcolm Gladwell earlier today, but I did not tell him you got the golf grudge.
Yes, I do. I love the game of golf, and I can't wait to discuss his one episode of his history podcast, Revisionist History on golf. And I look forward to sort of challenging that and learning from him what I might be missing from his point of view.
That will undoubtedly make for a lovely bus talk.
We'll keep it off record though, so that we can really.
We don't want you getting too much of that bourbon that you like. Before
That's right.
We
Well,
get
don't tell him about it in advance. I don't want that to be our first conversation.
Drew, it's been great to be with you today. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you on the road here come April.
Yeah, I look forward to being together. It's going to be quite a good time.
Thanks for the beautiful work you do in the world. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriet Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.